Hello, Hidden Gems. Live from New York. It is Saturday night. It's Hidden True Crime, though, on Saturday night. I am live from New York. I'm live from New York City right now. And why am I in New York City and why is it Saturday night opposed to Friday night? Because typically I do my recaps in the evenings right after court. And that is because yesterday I was in Long Island for the Gabby Petito Foundation dinner. Here are some of the photos from the event. That's Joe Petito, Gabby Petito's father right there. That's my producer, Grayson. And we had the best time. That's Susan Hendricks as well with Headline Crime with Susan Hendricks YouTube channel. And there we are again with Joe Petito. We spent time with Nicole, Tara, Jim, and Joe, and Heather Locklear was there. She was she was absolutely wonderful in person, so kind, and she made a big donation to this cause. And it is a cause that Dr. John and I plan to, honestly, we hope to be more involved in the future. We really believe in what the Petito family is doing in Gabby's memory, and they are working very hard for those that are missing persons, as well as domestic violence. And I'd encourage everyone to learn more about what the Gabby Petito Foundation is doing. Susan Hendricks is on their board as well. So it was a wonderful night. We overstayed our welcome. Every chair had been put away by the time we left, but it was a wonderful night. So, and I know that they raised a lot of money, and it will be going towards helping to prevent domestic violence, educate, help victims, as well as missing persons. But now that you know I'm in New York, let's get to why I was in Phoenix just a little bit ago. And that is because I am attending every day of court when it comes to the third trial of Lori Vallow Daybell. And it's been an interesting trial so far. Lori is not on her best behavior. Well, she might be on her attempted best behavior. This is where we are all hoping and wanting justice for Brandon Boudreaux, Lori Daybell's once nephew-in-law. He was married at this time to Melani Boudreaux, now Melanie Pulaski, Lori's niece. So it is day 2. It's taken a while to get to day 2, but we are on day 2, and it was a bizarre day in case Lori was removed from the courtroom at one moment. We'll get to that. The judge is like, take her out, take her out. And we learned about another open investigation, an active open investigation that is still going on with this case, despite 2019 being 6 years ago. So let's get into it. Day 2 of Lori Daybell's third and supposedly final trial, maybe final trial, kicked off with the kind of chaos we've come to expect from this case. It was just before 9:30 a.m. and the prosecution sat ready, waiting to proceed, but Lori still not with her advisory council. Neither one of them. Judge Boreski, clearly irritated, let everyone know what was going on. Lori's advisory counsel, Robert Abernathy, had emailed that morning saying he'd be late, blaming childcare. And just minutes before court was supposed to begin, Pamela Hicks phoned in from her office with her own excuse. She was still making copies of key photos. The judge was not having it.
Got an email at 9:20 saying she's still at her office printing off pictures, which is wholly unacceptable. Ms. Daybell, you represent yourself. You do not need your advisory council here, but I'm going to split the difference. She's being sent an email that says if she's not here at 9:50, we're going to start. If there's pictures that need to be printed off, staff can do that. Staff can bring it over later, but she should have been here at 9:30. If this were federal court, she'd probably be going into custody. I mean, this is ridiculous.
Pretty intense. If this was federal court, she'd be going into custody. This is ridiculous. Well, when Hicks finally showed up in person, she claimed the discovery was dumped on her the night before, but Boresky reminded her in no uncertain terms that she's expected in court on time and ready, period. And then came issue number 2, and it's a big one. Prosecutor Trina Kay raised concerns about Lori's opening statements. If you caught Thursday's coverage, and I hope you did, because we all watched it together, you'll remember Trina objecting multiple times to Lori's opening statements. And according to Trina, Lori didn't just make an opening statement. She gave unauthorized testimony, including calling herself, remember this, a loving and peaceful person, one showing no malice. And that, Trina argued, opened a legal door that Lori should have kept shut. Because under Rule 404A, the prosecution cannot bring up past crimes or character flaws unless the defense brings them up first. But now that Lori did, Trina can. Allegedly, possibly, soon, including the fact that Lori is already a convicted murderer of her own children. Thrice, 4 times. I've lost count. She's a serial killer. If a serial killer wants to explain that they're a loving person that has no malice, maybe it's time to bring up the fact that they're a serial killer to rebut that character assessment. So let's hear from the judge what he had to say about this.
Rule 404A does not allow the defendant to bring in character evidence to prove action in conformity, which is clearly what she was doing. Assuming she does, then the rules would permit the state to then bring in specific act evidence of this defendant. The defendant is trying to say she is a peaceful person, she has no malice. I believe that will open the door to allow the state to bring in the fact that she is a 4-time convicted murderer. Next, the defendant, in terms of bringing up information about Brandon hiring a PI and trying to make it appear that he has some vendetta against her, we have worked very hard to try to say there is an incident in Chandler. Brandon Boudreaux was very aware of the fact that this defendant and her brother had shot and killed Charles Vallow. And this is why he was very afraid for his life and trying to realize where she was and where Alex was. So if she wants to go into all of that information, then again, I believe she will be opening the door to allow Brandon to then explain why he was in so much fear for his life, why he was hiring a private investigator to locate this defendant and locate Alex Cox. So I just want to make it very clear that should she go into those areas, I will be asking to then bring in the fact that she has been involved in the murder of Charles Vallow, her own children, and her current husband's wife.
All right.
And I believe 405 will permit that, Your Honor.
So I had literally the same thoughts during her opening statement, especially when she started talking about I'm a person with good intent, kindness, peace and love, etc. And I was thinking in my head, wow, she's opening a big door right here. Now, it's not witness testimony. The jury has been instructed specifically that that's not evidence or testimony. But I think the notice that the state is putting out right now is well taken, because if you elicit testimony through a witness or you testify yourself along those lines, there's several doors that would be opened in that instance. Do you understand that?
I understand what you're saying, Your Honor.
Okay. The schedule.
I also understand that the state also withdrew their 404B, that they had no intention of doing that. So
that doesn't mean you get to say whatever you want.
I'm not saying that.
Okay.
I'm just saying they did give a notice for 404B and then they did withdraw it. So they didn't have any intention. I didn't have any intention.
The issue is if you bring in your good character as a reason of why this didn't happen, they're going to be allowed to rebut that type of testimony because you've opened the door to it.
Yeah, this could really be a game changer. The jury doesn't know Lori's history yet, but now they just might. And then came more testimony from Gilbert Police Detective David Frerer, who was already on the stand on Thursday. Lori representing herself, started her cross-examination. She wanted to know what evidence was collected the day Brandon Boudreaux was shot at. And Frerer said they recovered bullet projectiles, but no cigarette, as Lori seemed to suggest. In Alex Cox's truck, investigators found earplugs and a practice round, normal for gun range visitors, but Frerer couldn't confirm if Alex ever went to ranges. I think that'll come later. And Lori then turned to the Tesla, specifically the bullet hole. Could it have been found from a rifle or a handgun? Well, yes, it could have been either, according to the witness, but crucially, those bullet fragments were never sent for ballistic testing, which is odd to me. Lori brought up a neighbor who reportedly heard a bang, but didn't think it sounded like a gunshot, and Trina quickly objected, hearsay. She then questioned why only a few fragments were found and not the whole bullet. Frerer explained that bullets behave differently. Some shatter, some stay intact, some go through a lot of different things. But again, he acknowledged that while a test exists to identify bullet type, no one did run it. No one ran that test. And then came something interesting. While he didn't personally see it, Frerer testified that other officers may have recovered video from a neighborhood that day. That's important. And if this footage exists, it could either back up Brandon's story or cast doubt. So let's see if it's introduced. And on redirect, prosecutor Trina circled back to why no shell casings were located at the scene. Let's listen to the detective explain that.
Duncan asked you about casings and if you found any at the scene. Do you recall that line of questioning?
I do remember that.
If you were advised that the person firing the rifle was laying or lying in wait inside of the back of a Jeep, that only part of the barrel of that rifle came out the rear window, and then the rifle was fired, where would you expect that casing to land?
More than likely, it would still be inside that vehicle, the Jeep.
Okay, so you would not expect it to fly forward out of the Jeep and land out on the ground?
No.
The defendant asked you about if you saw a casing over by the pool. Would you expect, absent, I guess, a hole in the floor of the Jeep, to find the casing over there if it was still in the Jeep?
No.
So,
Never found the casing next to a pool.
but you wouldn't expect to find a casing over
No.
there, right?
No.
There was no evidence of anyone shooting over there,
Right.
and there would be no reason for a casing to be over there.
Correct.
So in this case, given the information you were given, were you surprised that you didn't find a casing?
No. It's it doesn't mean we don't look for the casing. We automatically look for the casings. But since it was inside of a vehicle, it's just like a drive-by shooting type of thing. We'll say once we pull the car over, the casings will be inside that vehicle, most likely. Then one or two might pop out if they have their gun outside the window, something like that. The casing might. But usually we searched, there was no casing found in this. So we determined it was more likely than not inside that vehicle still.
And the casing was in the windowsill? Sorry.
Yeah, the casing was more likely than not inside that vehicle still.
Inside the Jeep still?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Just your average drive-by shooting investigation that he knows well. And that neighborhood video that maybe they had, well, the next witness to take the stand was Lynette Mendoza, a former neighbor of Brandon Boudreaux. Back in October 2019, Lynette lived just a few houses away from where the attempted shooting took place. She wasn't just a neighbor. She also had something investigators were desperate for: a Ring doorbell camera. Thank goodness she had this in 2019. Her camera, motion activated and aimed directly toward the intersection near Brandon's home, may have captured a critical piece of evidence. And this is something we've never seen before. A new piece of evidence. If you think you've seen everything, this one's new. This is a new witness, new piece of evidence. And on the morning of October 2nd, 2019, a police officer knocked on Lynette's door asking for any footage her camera may have picked up. She complied, later emailing investigators the recordings from that day. And now, years later, that same footage is being presented in court, and the public is seeing this footage for the very first time. Let's take a look at what her doorbell camera saw.
So
I jumped when I heard that the first time, and I just jumped again. So in that video, what we could hear loud and clear was what sounded like a gunshot. Just as Brandon Boudreaux's black Tesla comes into view, heading towards his driveway, the sound pierces the quiet morning. Whether the jury believes it or not, it definitely adds weight to Brandon's account. Lori had no questions for Lynette Mendoza, so the court moved on. But next came a rewind of sorts, because yesterday, if you remember, or not yesterday, excuse me, Thursday, we're on Saturday now, Thursday, after prosecutor Trina K finished questioning Brandon, Lori, again, if you recall, said she wasn't ready to cross-examine him. She claimed her investigator had all her material and was missing in action, MIA, and the court agreed to go out of order and let Lori circle back on Friday. So now we are watching Lori Vallow question the man she's accused of conspiring to kill, her former nephew-in-law, Brandon Boudreaux. It was a big day on Friday. A day that was supposed to be dark in court ended up being a very important day. The cross-examining of Brandon Boudreaux, Lori facing Brandon. Lori started soft. She asked Brandon when they first met, and he said 2008, the year he married her niece, Melani. She asked if their relationship had always been friendly, and Brandon was honest. No, not always, he said. Things went south in 2018. Lori tried to remind the jury that once upon a time, they were family and they were close. Holidays, weddings, births. Trina objected for relevance. Then Lori remarkably was allowed to approach the bench to argue her case. In her last trial, sidebars had to be done through a headset to avoid putting a convicted murderer physically near the judge. But after filing a motion claiming she didn't have enough headsets for her team, Judge Borusky relented. So now Lori's at the bench like a real attorney, and yet still claiming the judge never grants her motions. Surprise. Back to Brandon. Lori asked if they ever argued. He said yes, most recently in June 2019 when he and Melani were fighting. Lori tried to get him to say she was always loving and supportive, but Brandon would not play along. He said, quote, "I can't say how you felt about me," he testified. Lori then moved to a painful moment, the June 25th fight. Brandon said it started in the afternoon and stretched past midnight. He remembered it clearly because it hurt. It started with Melani not wanting to attend his grandfather's funeral, but spiraled into much more. Lori asked if he knew Melani had childhood trauma around funerals, having lost her mother at 9. And maybe that was why she didn't want to attend his grandfather's funeral. When Brandon didn't say yes or no, just that he didn't know also what Melani was feeling at the time, just that it was hurtful to him. And then the real storm. Brandon testified that during that fight, Melani accused Brandon of hacking Lori's computer and trying to get Lori's LDS temple recommend revoked. Wild accusations, but they were coming straight from Melani's mouth this evening. Brandon said he was trying to save their family, save their marriage, and not argue about Lori. Then Lori tried to sneak in something which I think she thought was provocative. She asked Brandon if Melani had ever shown him a video of him dancing at a place called the Pink Pony. Cue Chapel Roan. No, just kidding. She wasn't brought up. But a place called Pink Pony where Brandon was allegedly dancing. Trina quickly objected. Sustained. Now, if you're wondering what Lori was up to with that question, she was clearly trying to smear Brandon's character and maybe put in evidence of some of the things she was talking about. A subtle dig meant to shame or cast doubt on Brandon. But I don't think it landed. I think it left people wondering what the big deal was to learn Brandon was dancing. And next, Lori asked if Brandon blamed her for the fight. And he said no, he was focused on his marriage and not his niece's aunt. or sorry, excuse me, not his wife's aunt. But eventually, after that fight, Melani said she wanted a divorce, and Brandon filed. It was finalized by mid-October 2019, just weeks after the shooting. They came to mutual agreements on custody of their 4 children. On the morning of October 2nd, Brandon had the kids, dropped them off, went to the gym, and then drove home where someone tried to kill him. Brandon said that after the shooting, he spoke with Detective Pillar and they discussed everything. Melani, Lori, the divorce, and that Lori had apparently convinced Melani that Brandon was gay. I think this is where the pink pony is coming in. And at this point, Lori tried again to bring up the pink pony. And that's when things blew up. The jury was sent out of the room. And what followed was an extremely long sidebar. And once the jury was gone, Judge Boreski gave Lori a stern warning about opening legal doors. Once again, she clearly doesn't understand this issue. So here's her stern warning once again. But then this stern warning escalated. A shocking and heated exchange between Lori and Judge Boreski. Let's just watch this together.
Record. That sidebar again discussed similar issues of if the defendant brings in evidence or testimony that she was a good person and no ill intent and those sorts of things, and specific acts of her being a good person, it could open the door to other things that she may not want the door open to. The state, the defendant, and advisory council were at the bench when we had that short 1 minute sidebar, but I don't know if anyone wants to supplement the record on that. Ms. Kay?
Just, Your Honor, that again, the state did raise any issue of character evidence under 404A and 405, that if the defendant opens the door and tries to advise that she's a good person, a peaceful person, a kind person, a loving person, any of those other types of things, that we believe that would allow us under 405 to then bring in specific acts such as the murder of her children, her husband, and her current husband's wife.
All right.
Which would also be 404B that they withdrew.
No, it'd be
Yeah,
405.
they withdrew it, but if you bring up 404 that
Then all 404B is in, or do we get a hearing on what 404B can come in? If I open the door, do I get a hearing? We stop trial and I get a hearing on.
Stop. We'll have a very short hearing, okay? If you're going to introduce how you have great character and good character, we're going to have a short hearing on what evidence that they can bring in to rebut that character, which could
Okay.
include being convicted of 4 murders.
And
So
would you
talk
like,
to your advisory council during the break. And
you don't
maybe
need to yell at me either.
yelling at you, okay?
Yeah, you are. And you do not need to talk
Okay.
to me that way. I'm
Take her
very
out. Take
courteous.
her out.
I'm very courteous to
Take
you.
her out. No, you have been nothing near courteous to me during the course of these proceedings. Talk with your advisory council about the rest of your cross. We're going to resume in 15 minutes.
All right.
Yeah, I feel secondhand stress watching that. I did the first time and I do now when it was happening and still now. Yeah, the jury wasn't there for that, but Lori did realize though that she wasn't going to be able to slip her little pink pony dig into the record during that moment. And the tone did shift quickly. You could practically feel Judge Boreski's patience wearing thin as Lori began talking over him, refusing to stop. Like it was super stressful to watch. But at one point, raising her voice at the judge, that was intense. It was also disrespectful. It was bizarre. And honestly, you know what I thought? I thought it actually gave off serious Daryl Brooks vibes. You remember him representing himself in court, refusing to follow the rules, turning his trial into a spectacle. Yeah, that energy. And after a much needed break and what we can only assume was a courtroom reset, Judge Boreski came back in with a warning. He looked directly at Lori and made it clear. If she continues interrupting, re-asking sustained questions, or talking over the court, he will revoke her pro per status, meaning she will not have the right to represent herself. Lori loses the right, full stop. Lori finally apologized and said she understood. So court resumed, and the cross-examination of Brandon Boudreaux continued. Lori asked if there were any other serious issues during his marriage to Melani, and Brandon admitted over the course of 10 years, sure, there were disagreements. But then things got weird again, as they always do when Lori represents herself. Lori brought up Brandon's interview with Detective Pillar, specifically about Melani believing that God had told her that Brandon was gay. Brandon clarified that he didn't think that was divine revelation. He believed it was Lori who planted the idea in Melani's head about him being gay. He never heard Lori say it. Melani never explicitly said that it was Lori either. But as Brandon said, and most of us could infer, it didn't take a prophet to figure out who was behind it. In other words, he didn't need revelation to figure it out. And when Pillar asked Melani what evidence she had for Brandon being gay, Brandon said it was all silly and vague, nothing real, no evidence, just poison, passed off as revelation. Then Lori shifted to the Jeep Wrangler. Brandon testified that he hadn't recognized the Jeep before the shooting. He described it to Detective Pillar as a puke green color. Lori asked if he'd ever seen that Jeep at her house prior to the attack, and Brandon said he didn't recall, he didn't remember. Lori brought up another strange detail, why during the 911 call, Brandon mentioned possibly seeing that a paintball gun, that maybe he remembers thinking it was a paintball gun. Brandon explained in the moment he didn't know what was happening. He had maybe seen a little boy. No gunshot was visible. No bullet shattering through the glass. He was confused, shocked. He was thinking out loud quickly. He called 911 fast. But once he got out of the car and saw the bullet hole, he knew this was real. And again, remember, Tammy Daybell also first initially called 911, also thinking that someone was pointing a paintball gun at them. I guess when something feels too surreal, we jump to other ideas. And then reality sets in. Brandon knew this was real. Lori then pressed about the shattered window. Brandon said when he pulled into his driveway, the Tesla's window gave out completely. Glass inside the car, outside the car, all over him. He was carefully climbing out. Didn't get cut. The first officer on scene, Officer Rob, asked what happened. Lori asked if this officer put her pen, Officer Rob was a female, put her pen in the bullet hole. Yes, that's a real question, she asked. But Brandon didn't remember that detail. Then Lori asked what happened next, and that's when things got emotional. Brandon describing the aftermath, the shock, the trauma, and the moment he called his dad, he choked up. Let's listen to that moment in Brandon's own words, because I think it's important to hear from him.
Realized that I was really close to being shot. I think a little bit of shock kicked in. I remember feeling a little overwhelmed, and I remember they were very considerate. They, I think when my hands even started shaking, I remember. And then they told me, do I have someone that can be with me? And then my first thought was my dad, you know. He's kind of my strength. And then after that, I thought of my friends. I have two really good friends, and that's what I remember is they said I could call them. And so they just came and tried to make things lighthearted, make things easier.
So is that Officer Rob that gave you the permission to call your friends?
I can't tell you for certain.
So was that after she finished questioning you on the events of the day?
I can't tell you for certain on that either. I don't know.
Was it before another officer arrived?
Like I said, I can't tell you for certain.
And how long did it take for your friends to show up?
I don't know. I probably was in a little bit of shock. I don't remember how long any of those things were.
Okay. And you had two different friends that showed up. Did they come together?
I think they came separate.
And at that point, when they arrived, was the crime scene tape already up?
I don't remember.
So they would have had to park outside of the crime scene tape, or you don't know?
I'm sure they did. I don't know though. I can't testify to that.
And so they stayed with you during that whole day?
Yeah, they were awesome. They dropped everything and they just spent time with me.
Gosh, I wanted to play the whole thing because it's moments like this that we remember and always remember that this isn't just about courtroom theatrics and Lauren Daybell being Lauren Daybell. It's a man who survived a murder attempt, who walked back into his house shaken and had to call his dad to say, someone just tried to kill me. Well, before court broke for lunch, Lauren continued to press Brandon with more details, if not scattered questions. She asked whether any officers entered his house or garage the day of the shooting. Brandon said he couldn't remember for sure, but it's likely they did. And then Lauren pivoted. Did anyone interview Brandon's two friends, Mark Bell and Chris Pierce? And Brandon said he didn't know, but I do want you guys to know that whether or not police interviewed those two friends, while that remains unknown, I did interview one of their wives. And you can find that interview in the description of this episode or in a pinned comment. I'll have Grayson pin this right now. It is worth a listen. And finally, Lauren zeroed in on Detective Pillar, the lead investigator on the case. Lauren asked how many times Brandon had communicated with him, and Brandon answered honestly. He said, quote, "I'm not sure, but it's been a lot. Over the past 4 years, we have talked many times," end quote. And that's when things got interesting, because just before the lunch break, outside the presence of the jury, a conversation unfolded that may have huge implications for this case. Huge. Lauren attempted to admit a key piece of evidence, an email between Brandon and Detective Pillar, and the contents, a discussion about a possible money motive, financial gain, involving who? Melani Boudreaux. Yes, you heard that right. A possible financial motive behind the shooting. Something many people have speculated about for years. For years. We waited years for this. And so now we get to hear exactly what was said, because if this email makes it in front of the jury, it could shift the way they view Melani's role and maybe Lori's too. So let's listen in and then talk about this.
I would like to ask him about it.
But what's relevant about it?
A lot of things, Your Honor.
What?
Judge, I can't hear her.
Please speak into the mic.
It's relevant to his discussion with Detective Pillar from the October 2nd date until this date on February 12th.
What is relevant about it that is an issue for this jury to decide? That's what relevance means. It's something that this jury would either make something more or less probable for some fact that they need to decide.
It's relevant in the way that this email communicates that the information that was being given to the detectives was directly from Brandon Boudreaux.
I know, but what in the content of that email is relevant for this case?
The fact that the last line.
Did I miss something? What's the last line? At the bottom? That's okay. Hold on. Make sure everyone can hear you and the court reporter can hear you.
I would have to ask to see that as well. I don't.
So
know what she's
the
talking
last
about.
line was Detective Pillar writes, is it Pillar or Pillar?
Pillar, like a pillar in a building.
Pillar. Detective Pillar writes, this information is requested so we can see if Melani has any financial gain from your death, basically, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so that creates motive for Melani. It seems like I guess it's fair area for him to talk about in general, but it's also a fair area for you to talk to the detective about what areas they investigated. But let me hear the state's response. But as far as that particular email comes in, I mean, I suppose you could ask some questions about it, but let me hear from the state.
Judge, obviously that's one, a conglomeration of emails, so I don't know that that fully covers everything. Two, I guess the defendant has never raised a third-party defense. I'm not sure if she's trying to say that this was all Melani Boudreaux, but that is actually an open investigation that is still ongoing. The state has obviously in trial referred to her as an active member of this conspiracy. So I'm not sure if she's trying to admit that or just question him if he was providing information to the police. But the last thing I will, again, just in terms of opening the door, is she's made a big deal about the number of calls and text messages. And as I've indicated, there is still an open investigation against Melani Boudreaux. And so many of that information might relate to that case, or it might also relate to the Tammy Daybell case, because there was information about that, as well as the Charles Vallow case. So to infer that all of those conversations related solely to this defendant, this incident, October 2nd, is probably a little disingenuous.
Were you intending to enter that as an exhibit, or just ask, were you asked to provide information that Melani might have a motive?
I would like to admit it, and I would like to question him on it as well, yes.
What is the bait page on
It's
that?
Bates 5465.
I don't know that there's anything in it that's particularly misleading or anything like that to the jury. I don't know how relevant it is, but I think to the extent that there may have been some questions about Melani's participation and whether or not she had a motive are relevant. What's the state's response, I guess? I know she didn't notice third-party defense.
I guess I'm asking now, is she doing that? Obviously, I have a right to know before the trial ends if that's an active defense she's asking for.
I'm not, Your Honor. I'm trying to say the connection that I've been accused of with Melani connects me to Melani. So that's why I'm trying to establish, how am I connected to this? I didn't have a financial gain here. This is the financial gain through Melani. This is conversations between the detective and Brandon
And
that I
obviously,
want to question him on. I'm not trying to blame Melani. That's my point.
I have
Well,
not alleged a financial gain for the defendant, so I
What was that? I'm sorry.
said I have not alleged a financial gain. I've not alleged much of a motive because we are trying to keep out much of that. So I guess, again, if we're going to start going into motives, then we have prior incidents of the defendant having financial gain in the previous trial that we did here. So if we want to go into the whole overarching financial scheme and cult activities, then we can do that. But again, the state had decided not to bring in any of that. If we're going to do that, then obviously we'll change who all of our witnesses are.
All right, let me, rather than just make a knee-jerk ruling, I'll think about it. We'll take this up at about 1:10.
Dude. Wow. So a lot to unpack in that sidebar, and a lot was unpacked in that sidebar. But the biggest bombshell, the prosecution finally confirmed what many of us have been wondering for years. There is an open investigation, an open active investigation into Melani Boudreaux-Pawlowski's role in Brandon's attempted murder. That question, why hasn't Melani been charged, has haunted this case. And now we know charges may still be coming. We'll see. Also worth noting, even though Lori insisted she's not using Melani as a third-party defense, meaning she's not going to allegedly say, I didn't do it, she did it. it's actually starting to feel like that's exactly what she's doing, whether she realizes it or not. I'm going to say I think she realizes it and she's pretending she doesn't, because from what I'm seeing, she is throwing her own niece under the bus and saying that she's the one with the motive to do this to Brandon. She's the one with the financial gain. So I don't believe Lori when she says that's not what she's doing, because Lori, the woman who refused to blame Chad Daybell in her first 2 trials, now seems to have no problem blaming Melani in her 3rd one. I don't think she would do this to Chad, but she's certainly doing it to Melani. After lunch, Judge Boreski came back with his decision. He is allowing Lori to ask a very specific, limited question about Melani's possible financial motive. And here's how Judge Boreski phrased it, word for word. Quote, in 2020, did Detective Pillar ask you to provide any documentation which might support whether Melani had a financial motive for your murder or death, end quote. So in other words, Lori asks this question to Brandon. And if Brandon answers yes, and spoiler alert, he does, then the state has permission to follow up with clarifying questions like whether Melani would have benefited from a life insurance policy. They also reminded the court that Brandon and Pillar's conversations may have spanned multiple investigations, not just this one. So when court resumed, Lori asked Brandon the approved question, and he answered yes, as I told you he would. And Detective Pillar did ask for documentation, and Brandon said he provided his life insurance policy, some bank records, screenshots of text messages, and other personal documents to Detective Pillar. Then Lori pivoted to the Tesla. She asked if Brandon's car had cameras. He explained that Teslas are outfitted with multiple cameras, front, back, sides, but his 2019 model did not save video footage at the time. Lori tried to press him. If he saw the Jeep drive by and he had seen Alex Cox many times before, shouldn't he have been able to recognize him? Well, Brandon stuck to his story, the story that he always told. He said he didn't see anyone inside the Jeep. He didn't see Alex. He didn't see anyone. So how could you recognize someone you don't see? Then Lori asked if he ever took photos of the damaged Tesla after the shooting, the window, the bullet hole. Brandon said he might have, but he did not remember. The car was impounded by police for a few weeks. When he got the car back, he had it repaired and later sold it. And next came the color of the Jeep, a detail that's been debated since day one. Lori asked, when did Brandon decide the Jeep was actually gray and not puke green? I love that, puke green. He explained that before the shooting, Charles Vallow had given him VIN numbers to help shop for insurance. Yes, Brandon had access to the Jeep's VIN. But Brandon says he never used it to determine the color, just to get quotes like Charles Vallow had asked him to. He told police the Jeep might be green, gray, olive. He wasn't sure. But after the fact, he gave the VIN to Detective Pillar since Charles had previously shared that with him. So let's take a moment to listen to this in court. Here we go.
Yes. So after October 2nd, did you ever look up the VIN number that you had access to of the Jeep Wrangler that was in my household?
I don't think I did. I don't have a recollection of it.
So did you just provide the VIN number to Detective Pillar?
Yes.
And when did you provide the VIN number of my vehicle to Detective Pillar?
I think on October 2nd. I'm not certain, but I think that's when I gave it to him.
So on this day, on October 2nd, you provided that VIN number to the detective?
I think at some point, if I recall correctly, I remembered that I had it. So I got it and sent it to him just to make sure that he had it.
So at that point, even though you thought it was a puke green or olive Jeep, he would have access to the information that it was actually a gray Jeep that was in my family household. Is that correct?
I can't testify what he had access to.
But you provided him with that information that very day?
To the best of my recollection, yes.
So while Lori's trying to corner Brandon on color discrepancies, Brandon's account, in my opinion, seems to hold. He gave what he could remember and passed on what he knew. And I agree with those in comments saying gray and green, something could look like green or gray in different lights. Olive green has gray in it. My brothers growing up were colorblind, and I remember they would pinch me on St. Patrick's Day because they thought I wasn't wearing green, and they said I was wearing gray, and I said it's green. Those colors can look similar, especially if it's olive. Meanwhile, Lori's attempt to make the Jeep ID murky only reminds the jury of one thing: the shooter came in a car registered to Charles Vallow, who was already dead. Back on Cross, Lori pivoted once again, this time to Alex Cox and his familiarity with guns. She asked Brandon if he knew that Alex likely liked going to the gun range, and Brandon said no, and added that he doesn't recall any family member ever inviting Brandon to a shooting range, let alone going to shooting ranges. Then Lori asked the obvious: did Brandon own a gun himself? And he said yes, but he made it clear not in October of 2019. Melani, his wife, did own a firearm, but it was registered in her name. And at that point, they were separated. Brandon had no access to it. From there, Brandon recounted that Detective Pillar took his phone the day of the shooting to extract its data, cell bright extraction. He got it back either that same night or the next morning. And he also confirmed that he and Melani exchanged texts that day talking about childcare and plans to drop off their youngest at the park. It's what parents do, especially even when they're separated, or especially, I should say, when they're separated. And after that, Brandon headed to the gym just 5 to 10 minutes away. So nothing new here. Just reinforcement of a timeline we've already had, we've heard again and again. But what did stand out during this portion is Lori's disorganization. She shuffled through papers, searching for the next question. Her line of questioning felt scattered, even irrelevant at times, and it all culminated in one question that sparked a quick objection. Lori asked Brandon if he only gave Pillar information about Melani because he wanted her charged with attempted murder. Objection sustained. And just like that, Lori was done. No further questions. Then, though, came redirect. And Trina K brought us back to June 25th. She asked Brandon why that date has stayed with him all of these years. Why June 25th, 2019? And Brandon's voice cracked as he explained. He had just lost his grandfather. And that same day, he lost something else: his family. That argument with Melani, the accusations she made, the influence Lori had over her, was the beginning of the end. And Brandon says that's why he reached out to Lori and Charles that day to ask them to clear up the lies Melani was repeating. And then Trina had him clarify his Jeep description: puke, greenish, gray Wrangler, no spare tire, Texas plates, and that it all came directly from Brandon's memory. He told the 911 operator he wondered in the moment if it was a paintball gun. But once he saw the hole in his Tesla, he knew the truth. And Trina closed with this: even if Melani had something to gain from his death, Brandon testified. He said, quote, "I have no doubt Lori and Alex were involved," end quote. And with that, Brandon stepped down. The next witness, Detective Nathan Duncan from the Chandler Police Department. Detective Nathan Duncan, he's appeared on Dateline a couple of times early on in this case, and he was actually on the witness list previously. He was a responding officer to another key scene, the July 11th, 2019 killing of Charles Vallow, Lori's fourth husband. During that investigation, Duncan entered the garage of Lori's home. And what did he find? A gray Jeep Wrangler with Texas license plates just sitting there. Let's take a look at those photos now, because honestly, you can absolutely see how someone could initially mistake this paint color for a murky green, in my opinion, especially in certain lighting.
Yes, they were.
And inside the garage itself, did the Chandler police photograph a Jeep Wrangler?
We did.
I'm going to put, so exhibit 81 and 80, are we seeing sort of the side, and then 82, the front of that Jeep?
Yes.
When we get to 83, so let me pull it back a little more. And then a close-up, is that the license plate that was on the Jeep at Lori Vallow's house on July 11th with a Texas plate of LWD 0997?
Yes, it is.
I want to make a quick correction. Detective Duncan was not in the Dateline, forgive me, but he has been a witness at several trials, including Chad Daybell's. Yeah, every trial. And at those times, those photos were taken. Detective Duncan noted something key. The tint on the Jeep's windows was light enough to make out shapes and seats inside, a critical detail when it comes to the shooter's visibility or lack thereof. So that was from the July 11th incident. You could see through. It wasn't tinted yet. Also at Lori's house that day, Alex's truck with a personalized plate, and the personalized plate was CP Quint. As Duncan dug deeper into the Chandler shooting, the one that ended in Charles Vallow's death, he obtained access to Lori's iCloud account. And what he found there filled in more pieces. There were text messages between Lori and Alex where Lori gave him her new email address. And there were also texts from Brandon and Lori the night of that emotional fight with Melani, begging her and Charles to help clear things up. And he was pleading with Lori to dispel the lies about the hacking, about the LDS Temple recommend. But Lori, she left those messages on read and never responded. In other words, she read them and decided not to respond. And Duncan also tracked Lori and Alex's move to Rexburg, Idaho, and later gained access to a second iCloud account tied to a new email address. And this one had receipts and confirmations for a storage unit in Rexburg. And then came cross-examination, where Lori tried to challenge the chain of custody for her iCloud data. She asked Duncan how he got it from Apple and whether he could be sure that he received all of the data. And he explained that Apple sends data via email, and the computer crimes unit uses specialized software, again called Cellbrite, to extract and interpret the data. No, Duncan said, he can't personally verify every byte, but he trusts the digital team. He has no reason to believe anything would be omitted. And on redirect, Trina made it clear the digital forensics team doesn't even know the details of the case. They don't pick and choose data. They just extract everything. And then came the next witness, Tom Olsak, a retired Arizona State trooper who now works with the U.S. Secret Service in Phoenix as a network intrusion forensic analyst. Back in 2019, he was in the digital forensics unit and was asked by Gilbert Police to extract data from a 2018 Jeep Wrangler's infotainment system. He explained that newer cars have what's called an infotainment system, the central console that runs everything from maps to music to Bluetooth connections. And with the right software, you can extract call logs, GPS data, and more. But there was a problem. When Olsak traveled to Rexburg with Detective Pillar to inspect Lori's Jeep, he realized the vehicle had an older infotainment system, one not compatible with their software. Even with the help of the manufacturer's support line, they were not able to pull any used data from Lori's system. He tried again with Alex's Ford F-150, and while he managed to retrieve some data there, the memory chip was too small to go back far enough. So no October 2019 data was recovered. That was difficult to hear. Lori had no questions for Olsak. And that brought us to the final witness of the day, the name we have heard over and over again, and now we get to hear from him, Detective Brian Pillar. In 2019, Pillar was part of the violent crimes unit at the Gilbert Police Department, and now he's actually currently working as a school resource officer. But back then, he was the lead investigator on this case. He arrived on the scene around 10:30 a.m., about an hour after the shooting. The road was taped off, cones marked evidence, and the Tesla's driver's side door was open. Pillar noticed shattered glass in the car, in the driveway, and in the street. He testified that the damage was consistent with a bullet scraping through metal at a high speed. No crime scene techs were available that day, so Pillar and his fellow detectives processed the scene themselves, collecting fragments, photographing the damage, and marking glass placements. Brandon sat in Pillar's car and gave a recorded interview where he named Lori Vallow and Alex Cox as the two people he believed might want him dead. He also described the shooter's vehicle, a gray Jeep Wrangler, no spare tire, Texas plates, the same Jeep registered to Lori. Pillar noted that because of how the shot was fired from a rifle, likely inside the Jeep with the shooter hidden and only the barrel poking out, he didn't expect to find shell casings at that scene. Those would have likely ejected inside the Jeep itself. The team searched for more bullet fragments, but only 4 tiny pieces were found in or on the Tesla. Still, they canvassed the neighborhood, asking residents for surveillance video, and that's how they eventually got the ring footage from the neighbor down the street, from Lynette. Brandon agreed to let police extract data from his phone. His Tesla was brought in for further analysis, but yielded no additional evidence. It was eventually returned to him since it was his only vehicle. Trina then circled back to Charles Vallow's murder in Chandler. That's how Pillar learned that Lori owned a 2018 Jeep. That incident on July 11th. Chandler PD had photographed the Jeep in her garage just 3 months before Brandon was shot. On October 14th, Brandon told Pillar that Melani was moving to Idaho, where Lori and Alex had already relocated. That's not sus. Just everyone moved to Idaho together. No cults being formed there. But just 2 days later, sorry, forgive that. I'll just get into what was said on the stand. Just 2 days later, on October 16th, a license plate reader picked up Lori's Jeep traveling through Holbrook, Arizona. Captured in the image, a Jeep Wrangler with no spare tire. Exactly as Brandon had described. Dun, dun, dun. And by October 31st, Halloween, Pillar and Idaho law enforcement worked together to seize that very Jeep. On November 4th, it was located and impounded. Pillar then traveled to Idaho to process it for gunshot residue, DNA fingerprints, and any other physical evidence. So let's hear him describe exactly how GSR, or gunshot residue, is collected. And this step really is crucial because if residue is found, it doesn't just confirm a shot was fired, it may reveal who was near that weapon when it happened.
Can you describe for us what you use to collect GSR?
Both GSR and any physical evidence, you wear gloves. You will be changing, usually have one primary pair of gloves on, and then you will have a secondary pair of gloves you put on. That secondary pair of gloves is removed every time you go to process another location or collect another evidence item. In other words, you're using a lot of protective gloves while processing a scene. With GSR in particular, you're going to have a controlled vial and a sample vial. The controlled vial is not opened. It is next to the sample vial. That is just to give the lab a controlled example of the same type of material that has not been utilized. The sample vial is sealed. Once it is open, it's cylindrical. It's about the size of a shotgun shell is the best way I can describe it. Once it is unsealed, it has a circular adhesive. That adhesive is then pressed against the area in which you are collecting where you believe gunshot residue might exist. Once that's collected, you reseal it with that adhesive into the tube, and then it is sealed with an integrity seal to prevent any tampering before any type of lab analysis.
Well, Detective Pillar explained that the process for collecting DNA from a vehicle is very similar to collecting GSR, or gunshot residue. They also use graphite fingerprint powder and specialized adhesive tape to lift any viable prints from surfaces like door handles, consoles, and windows. It's meticulous work, slow, careful, and often critical. But before the courtroom could go any further, Judge Boreski announced that the court would be breaking for the weekend. The cross-examination and continued questioning of lead detective Ryan Pillar will pick back up on Monday morning, and I will be there. And with so many unanswered questions still hanging in the air, from how we know who exactly fired the gun. I mean, we know, but how do we really know? How does the jury know? To whether Lori left any trace evidence in that Jeep, we know next week could bring the most pivotal moments of this trial yet. In court on Friday, I also want to point out, was Nancy Jo Hancock, Kay Woodcock, as well as Brandon and his wife, as well as other friends and family. And I do know that some additional families should be coming next week. I'll keep you posted on that. And again, I will be there. There were some interesting moments with the jury. We had people in the courtroom sharing what the jury was doing when the jury was there. Again, reminder, they weren't there when some of those really heated moments happened. And of course, when we learned that Lori might throw her own niece under the bus, they weren't there for those times. But when they were, there were a couple of moments where two jurors allegedly looked at each other and sort of smiled, like, I can't believe this is happening. Overall, their thoughts are that she's not looking good in front of the jury. There were also a lot of note taking during Detective Duncan's testimony and overall, but specifically during that testimony, according to our sources in the courtroom. I just want to thank everyone for your super chats and gifted memberships tonight. It means so much. Like, genuinely, thank you. Thank you. Marie Louise, it means so much. Thank you. Thank you. Goodness. Really. Thank you. His reasons for fear should be admitted into trial. I agree. VIN assigned color doesn't account for aftermarket paint any more than it does aftermarket window tint. Interesting. Sandy's asking, weren't two of Brandon's kids noted as dark? Yeah, they were. I believe that, yeah, Melanie does still. Who knows what's going to happen with that? I'm just looking at any of your thoughts or pin comments. Thank you, everyone. Oh, Kim, yeah. Yours and Dr. John's thoughts about what this would look like had it been 9 months later with COVID. The cult numbers, the school daycare closures, etc. It's all horrific, but happening 9 months later. It's interesting that this was a before that. Thank you, everyone, for your super chats and becoming members. Truly, thank you. Thank you so much. Any other questions that we have before we take off? I know that we've got to go grab dinner. It's late here. What time is it here? It's almost 10:30 here in New York City. Luckily, it's the city that doesn't sleep, right? That's what they say. We'll find out. We're going to go grab some dinner. But I want to thank you for your patience. I mentioned to everyone that I would be going live last night. And like I said, it just didn't happen, but for a good cause. Thank you, everyone, though, for your support and watching this tonight. We'll also have this later edited and posted on our podcast. And if you're not following us on our podcast, please do. It's on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Oh, question. Do you think Melanie could have agreed to go along with Lori's defense idea? No, I don't think she would agree to that. I don't think she would be too happy about that. No. In fact, one thing I also noticed too is, yeah, there's no immunity, because if she had had immunity, then she would be testifying on behalf of the prosecution, right? She'd be saying, my aunt is guilty. She's nowhere to be found. There is no witness testimony of Melanie Boudreaux-Pulaski in this trial. Yeah. Aaron is saying, I can't imagine. Well, thank you. Thank you. Thank you to our moderators so much. Somebody else said, I can't imagine. Oh, Southern Shell says, I can't imagine how hard it was for Brandon to have to talk to Lori and answer those questions. Can you imagine? Yeah. Reliving that. I'm sure there was some PTSD. It is so tragic. Please listen to our interview with Jess. is that pinned in comments still? Yes, it is. So that was a question that Lori had for Brandon. Did police interview either of his two friends? He didn't know, but I can say that we have interviewed one of their wives, or their then wives, and that is Jess. And I recommend listening her powerful interview if you want to understand how this affected people and Brandon. Take a listen. All right, everyone. Thank you so much. I do have wonderful moderators. I really, really do. We also, Grayson, is our live stream put up for Monday? Not yet. Grayson will be putting that up. If we put it up now, though, it'll feed to it. No, it'll take a while. Okay. We'll have our live stream for Monday put up a little bit later. Share this with everyone that might have missed us Friday night. And like I said, I'll be back in court on Monday. Until then, we're going to go find a place to eat in Manhattan. So we'll see you guys. Bye-bye.